Thank you. Good day, everyone. It is so great to see you and really to be part of this amazing conference. And I think the timing is, it's the perfect timing to have a discussion in and around, how do we handle not only the pandemic and what has come out of that, but, what role does entrepreneurs play in this? And so I really wanted to take you through a little bit of a journey about the entrepreneur landscape and talking about just the beauty of change and how entrepreneurs and if you are in a role as a college student, you have a role to play in entrepreneurship, right? So you too can kind of move into this space and start looking at how do you create something that is going to solve issues and challenges for where we are today. So during this session, we're going to hit on these key topics. I will try to, really embellish on all of the different areas and to add in some different stories that hopefully will make sense to you. Most organizations, when we think about entrepreneurship and where it starts, many states and local governments like to use entrepreneurship as their economic growth strategy. So one of the things that you will see if you visit here in Maryland, you will see signs all over the place because it's part of our governor's strategy to say Maryland is open for business. This has been a huge piece for the way that we've looked at how do we really move forward in these challenging times. And even more so, if I think over the last year, our local government here has called on learning institutions. It's called on the small businesses. It's called on startups and entrepreneurs. It's really, calling everyone to bring your best to help us to move forward. And so when I think about entrepreneurship in general, if we're not helping to fuel that system, manage the system, it can actually stall economic growth. It can really cause a lot of challenges and problems, and it can also create inequalities. And so we really have to make sure that we're putting the right framework in and around that ecosystem to be supportive, ensuring that entrepreneurs all over, in general, have access to capital. This is a huge issue, and you'll see me talk about this a little bit more later on. I think one thing that we could all agree on is that the talent pool that you need to be able to start a business and run a business is very challenging. And so that continues to be an issue, not just for entrepreneurs, but also for governments and other companies around the world. And then the one thing that I'm not real sure is consistent across the world is having a wide range of nonprofit and government programs that supports the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Without these types of programs that are supporting technology transfer, commercialization out of the academic institutions, research and development, and supporting the startups, you really won't see the growth that we're expecting. And I'll highlight some examples that I think maybe one or two you'll be able to relate to later on when we talk about, where do we see any of this growth happening? How do we see the role of government, the academic institutions in creating really the new landscape? So I like to talk to organizations about creating a culture of entrepreneurship. So whether you are a large business, an academic institution, a small business, or just a startup kind of going, out and creating your first idea, you really need to ensure that you're creating a culture of innovation, this culture of entrepreneurship that can unleash amazing power and perspective in your organization. We should be using this to fuel our students, our employees, to really go out and make a difference in our current business, make a difference in new business, changing the overall landscape. And if we start creating that culture, the things that we want to look at and what we want to wrap into that is being able to make sure that, no matter what kind of organization you are, if you're a Fortune 500, what we call the really large companies doing a lot of business, you want to create a learning organization. You want to have vision. An organization that doesn't have vision will just flounder. And that creates problems for being able to see the growth that they want. They do need to be profit oriented. I know that many organizations, they say, well, we want to have this entrepreneurship, but we're not really focused on profits. But you have to be able to focus on the growth and making a profit, because if you're not making a profit, you can't reinvest back into the business. Even nonprofits, while they're not in the business of doing work similar to private companies, for-profit companies, they still need to have a certain amount of income that comes in to be able to support the operations of the business. And then they have to have that excess in order for them to fuel that future growth. So without that, they really become what I would consider to be obsolete. You want to have creativity and adaptability, and then be focusing on, if you're a large organization or even an academic institution, how can we create rewards and reward our folks for being innovative and entrepreneurial, and continuing to look at how they can create the next level of technology, or that next level solution that may be something that's going to solve for COVID. And we will talk about one that really came out of the government labs here in the US. But the key thing to remember, and the quote at the bottom for Deborah Thornton, is an energy force that becomes woven through the thinking, behavior, and the identity of those within the group. That's how we want to instill a culture of innovation, this culture of entrepreneurship. And I would say, if you want your institution or your company to get the bug, you want them to get the bug in and around this key point. So when we look at the different types of entrepreneurship, we could probably come up with another 10, but these are the most popular ones that I see out there in the landscape. And they hit on social entrepreneurs, research, innovation, right? So entrepreneurs that are focused on just the innovation pieces. Big business, they will have research and development arms. You will see where big businesses will have innovation centers, looking at the newest technologies or the future technologies. Small business, this is really key. If you look at the number of small businesses, at least here in the US, and the contribution that they have towards economic development and really creating that new growth, creating the new ideas, they play a significant role. And then what we call scalable startups, right? So startups that are creating ideas that can actually push it out to market for someone else to buy. Maybe an investor will invest in it, and it's going to kind of fuel and create really the increase that you would want to see. They have to be able to scale, right? They're going to bring it to market. And so those are the different types of entrepreneurship. And one of the things that you have to think about, if you want to be an entrepreneur and go out into the space and say, I'm going to solve a really big problem, for the world, or I'm going to solve a really big problem for my country, because that really is where entrepreneurship is focused on, solving, big problems or solving a problem, then you need to figure out which one of these spaces that you want to be in. I would have to say for myself, I kind of cross a couple of these different spaces with the focus that I have. I'm, focused in on that research and trying to create new ideas and thoughts, and using research to fuel what we will see in industry. I'm looking at the social side, because I really, want to work with other organizations to solve some of our social economic problems that we have here, solving some of the inequalities that we see within the US. And then I would consider, my business as a small business where I am really trying to scale. And I'm trying to scale in terms of innovation and technology, and looking at, if our overall community has an issue, then how can I scale my organization to be able to solve, or at least play a part in those overall solutions. So some of the key things that we see that not only are why entrepreneurs are important, but why what are the factors that affect them. And I think this is where we get into a lot of discussions. And I work, one of my client organizations, TEDCO, which is focused on supporting the entrepreneurs out there in the community. They support tech transfer. They're supporting that research and development. And one of the key things that we hear all the time, that's a huge issue, regardless of what type of entrepreneur you are, is this availability of capital. And this is one of the places where, if we're not really careful, we can actually see where there are inequalities. Here in the U.S., one of the things that we're having a conversation about right now is women entrepreneurs and minority entrepreneurs, and their access to capital is not the same as someone who is non-minority or non-female, right? So how we actually help them to see what resources are available, creating more resources that are going to be applicable for those individuals. We are also seeing, and I think this is across the board, as we're continuing to try to create new things, the challenge is in our labor and our raw materials. So if you're in that manufacturing space, you may find that the materials are not readily accessible. And that can almost shut an entrepreneur, a budding entrepreneur down if they're not careful. So now as we think about just, the landscape of the supply chain and making sure that we understand it and we know whether or not we're going to be able to get the materials that we need if we're in that manufacturing space. If you're in the services space, more like myself, then where is the talent going to come from? How are we going to deal with, finding out and finding really the best people and making sure that we can get the right talent pool? We're always going to have a challenge and an issue looking at the legal and the political side. One of the organizations that I've recently joined is about supporting our small businesses here in the US and ensuring that we are not creating regulations and laws that really is a disservice to those organizations. So if we want to continue to see our overall landscape survive and grow, then we have to make sure that we're not working against it. And so this particular group, one of the things that we focus on is trying to identify all of the key issues that face our small businesses in the US. And we make sure that we get that to our legislators, our politicians, so that they can hopefully join us in the fight to really create a better landscape and opportunity for our small businesses. And then the other thing that we always see, and you may not see it as much depending on which country you're from, but the taxation and what we call governmental interference. And I don't want to, put a bad spin on this, but the challenge is that it can make it, sometimes we put laws and regulations in place. Sometimes the government will, want to tax or put a tax or put a charge on, creating your business, starting your business, that just makes it uneconomical for you to be able to do business. And so the key thing is that we have to remember is entrepreneurs and this whole thing of startups and research and development and looking at how that moves forward, all of that creates jobs, it creates change, and it really does have a place to give back to society. Because if you think about jobs and change, all of that impacts society across the board. So they are extremely important in this overall ecosystem. If we think about technology transfer and the commercialization, so this is a huge space where there are many paths, but also many players. And we need to understand, who these organizations are, what role do they play, how do they move things forward? And, sometimes that traditional research and development can be what we would consider to be slower. I think here in the US, we've seen this change in the last couple of years where they're really trying to reinvigorate the role and the process for research and development, making sure that they no longer turn on a very slow cycle, right? Making sure that they're starting to push things out a little bit faster, learning how they can, take an idea and get it to market a lot faster. And when you go back to the entrepreneurs, they play an increasing role in being able to help in this R&D space. There are places where we've already talked about the startups and using venture capital to get their ideas out there. There are organizations that deliver services. So you see this whole software as a service. That is a huge trend that has really came out over the last 10 years or so, and maybe even more than 10 years. But I think you see it more as a what we would consider to be a service offering, right? So you're seeing more and more organizations saying, how do they commoditize their services and offer it through these software offerings, right? So how do they commoditize that and really make that part of their business that continues to go almost, I don't want to say that it goes on autopilot, but it's almost looking at creating something that can put it on autopilot. And then on the manufacturing side, I think most of us think that manufacturing is old. It's very manual. But what we actually see today in manufacturing is it is very high technology. I mean, they're using technology in ways to be able to shorten the timeline for them to be able to get things to market. How can they create efficiencies using different technology? And so manufacturing has significantly changed. One of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is this is a place where in the US we're not seeing as many women and minorities entering in this space from a small business entrepreneur perspective. And so one of the focuses that we have here in Maryland is really trying to get more women, especially more women, in this entrepreneurial space for manufacturing and even in the construction area. But then there are many players. So in the US, we make use of what we call government labs. We have government labs all over the US, and they're constantly, working with researchers and entrepreneurs to bring in new ideas, new thoughts. They create competitions. They actually will, if they find an idea that really fits and meets one of the needs that they're focusing on, they will actually fund those ideas to continue to research and then to really try to move them forward to commercialization. And there you have the startups, you have research organizations, but then we also have large companies. So if you go out to large company websites, just pick a few that are really, really large, and one that I always like to go out and look at and to see what they're doing is you can go out and look at Microsoft. Look at Microsoft's website and look at the place where they have innovation. Look at how they're using that. Look at how they're continuing to push new ideas, thoughts, and growth. If we were to look at Microsoft from about 20 years ago and then looking at what Microsoft does now, it is completely different, has completely transformed. And they can't do that without having the innovation, the research and development, and continuing to push new ideas through their organization. If we continue down this path, here are some examples that I pulled out. And one of the most recent ones in the research and development space is about the COVID pill that if you haven't heard about it, you can actually go out and look at Merck has really kind of taken the lead in development of, what we call a COVID pill. So that's a place where research and development has been taking ideas that they've been working on for a long time, but they're actually applying it to a real world problem, something that can be solved for today. Or even in the artificial intelligence space, where we're seeing them have breakthroughs in melanoma detection and using AI to be able to actually, map and do the patterns. And I would highly suggest that, you go out and look at, there's a site that I love to go out and review periodically, and it's called R&D 100. And so it's Research and Development 100. And so if you were to Google that, you would see some of the top 100 research and development ideas that have been pushed out and that are really making way out there in the industry and really fighting change, right? They're actually really fighting to change the way that we see things. And then you have the tech transfer. Here's one that I think everyone can really associate with that really came out of, it was a technology transfer that was commercialized out of one of the laboratories, and that was the World Wide Web. And so if you may not be old enough to really understand that the web was not always here, but when the web was originally created, that actually came out of a government laboratory, and it was then commercialized. Genomics is another industry, and then one I think that if you know about the Chevy Volt, what they've been able to do with their battery power. If it wasn't for someone advancing the ideas and thoughts around the cathode, they would not be able to do what they do today with their vehicle, and to make it so that it could operate on battery power. And then the one thing that I think we've all seen as a result of COVID, where you see these ultraviolet light sticks coming up that really are put out to kind of kill different microbes. But in this particular case, they're actually using ultraviolet light to kill microbes in waterborne diseases. And why is this important? Because we have a lot of places, water is one of those commodities that we do not have enough of, and that's fresh water. And so there are countries that do not have access to fresh water because of these waterborne diseases. And this particular technology is allowing them now to be able to treat and now create that fresh water access. So building bridges, I consider the entrepreneurial market, the whole landscape itself, which includes all the things that we've been talking about, as a way to really build bridges. And it helps us to build bridges from where we are today and thinking about, where we need to be tomorrow. If we are thinking about just the technology and how we bring it to market, we have to focus on building stronger connections between that research and development and that technology transfer marketplace. How do we really kind of tighten that up, and to make sure that we can continue to use that as a mechanism? We have to look at ways for increasing our ability to get things out there in the channel and really channel exposure, and maybe even develop some incentives in and around getting more people to think about kind of moving into this space of taking these ideas and trying to get them to market. And then leveraging the research that happens within our nonprofits as well as our for-profit organizations, so that they can continue to emerge with these technologies that will continue to change the landscape of the world. But we can't do that if we don't nurture the process. And so I've highlighted a number of areas where we need to think about, how do we nurture this whole entrepreneurial ecosystem, right? If we want to create that culture of entrepreneurship, then how do we nurture the process? How do we make it so that it's almost part of our everyday thinking? We're always thinking about creating new. We're always thinking about, how can we go out and make a difference with a thought or an idea and bring that to market? And that means that we have to strengthen and support the communications in and around the research and that business community. We have to support those connections and increase those connections. We have to create the methods that allows us to match, technologies and opportunities, and to have an evaluation process so that we can quickly move them forward to commercialization. I mean, that's the key thing. We see a lot of times where ideas and thoughts stay in that stage of ideas and thoughts. People don't understand how to move it forward to creating a product that is going to happen out there in the space. And a lot of times, it's not that we can't really move that product forward. We may not have the connections. We may not have the ideas around, who would I reach out to? Who should I talk to? We may not have the resources. And so just having conversations in the community, creating a place where, we can come together. And here in the state of Maryland, almost all of our institutions, all of our public institutions, right, that are academic institutions, are creating. So if they don't have this today, they are actually creating what we call these entrepreneurial centers of excellence, right? So they're standing up centers where our entrepreneurs, academia, researchers can come together and talk about, how do they take some of their thoughts and ideas and commercialize them. It's a very collaborative space. It's a very open space. And on many campuses, they have it situated so that individuals, from the community can actually come in and collaborate. And so think about, how do you bring all of this together? And, the academic institution is one of those places where that can happen. And so making sure that we're creating these entrepreneurial centers that allow us to bring together all of the different parts of our community to solve for the big problems. And then we have to really simplify and standardize the process. If I go back to when I was starting my company, one of the things that drives me crazy is how many different places do I need to go to get information? My thing is, why can't it be one place and make it very simple? Why can't I do everything online? Why do I have to go through a paper process? I mean, can we streamline this? Can we make it easier? It's almost as if some of these processes are set up to really discourage you from moving forward. And it really should be just the opposite. And so we really have to simplify and standardize some of these processes and to make it much easier for someone to understand. And then the legal frameworks that supports this. This is a huge conversation around cyber. The legal framework is not there supporting in the way that it should. And so sometimes we wait to get to the legal aspects until after we have a new technology, until after we see it out there. But really, our legal frameworks need to be keeping pace with where technology is going. They need to kind of get ahead of, thinking just the same way an entrepreneur would, thinking, 5, 10, 15 years down the road. And how does this affect the legal framework and what should be in place to support that growth? So with that, I'm going to stop there and open it up for questions. And so if someone can, just work with me and let me know, because I know that we've kind of covered a wide range and I kind of went through that pretty fast. But, what I would say to you that if you're a student or if you're an individual contemplating on whether or not you want to be an entrepreneur, and if you want to be able to solve and solve for the problems that we see that the pandemic has created, I would say the time is now. When we go back through history, most pandemics, when we see what helps us to get back to a new normal, not necessarily the same, but what helps us to recover, it really is about innovation. It's about the entrepreneurs and the small businesses and creating the new technologies and bringing those things to market. That's what's going to get us on a very different path forward. And so consider that. Step into what I consider to be the darkness, right? This path of entrepreneurship, to be able to change the way that we see how even pandemics can affect us, not only today, but far into the future.
Do we have questions from the hall? Oh, we do have 2 questions. So let's start with the lady at the back here.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Singh. When you were listing the factors affecting entrepreneurship, I had one in mind that wasn't really there. And it is, how about the guidance and mentorship, the lack of guidance and mentorship as a major factor affecting entrepreneurship? And not just when it comes to the tactical process of setting up a successful startup, but also the interpersonal aspect of it. Because I find as an aspiring entrepreneur, that's my major problem. Not capital, not talent. I mean, I will probably get there, but right now it is guidance. And I know you mentioned academic institutions and their centers of excellence, which sort of addresses that. But however, don't you think it's a major factor?
I do. And one of the things that we focus on in Maryland is creating these cohort groups where individuals can go not only to get mentoring, they can do some peer mentoring. And so it is important for you or really organizations to set up. So we have one organization, and actually most of our academic institutions, if they're focused on entrepreneurship, they have a group of mentors that they can assign to an entrepreneur. So you can actually go to them and say, I would like to have this one-on-one mentoring. There are tons of places where I can go for even myself to get mentoring and guidance. And so one of the things that I did as I was starting my business and building my business plan, I went to one of the organizations that we have here in the US that they assigned me an experienced business mentor, and they went through with me, how do I create my business plan? And now I have a business plan. They were able to review it. They helped me to make changes. And that's one of those pieces that if you don't have that infrastructure in place, you really do need to create it. So I agree. We have to create, more groups, and one of the things that you could do yourself is to set up really your own peer mentoring group or your kind of board of advisors, I would say. So you need to have that in and around you to help you.
Another question from the first row here.
Hello. You made an interesting case about company dealing with melanoma detection. And I know one Estonian startup called Termtest, and I checked they are operating now in Germany, in Lithuania, in Russia, in several European countries. So based on this case, my question is, if there are companies or startups doing quite similar things, moving in a similar direction, do you have any good ideas how to build bridges between such companies in USA, in Europe? Maybe they could set up some joint venture to conquer the whole world, or some other synergies. So any ideas in this field? Because as you know, Europeans even can't travel in October to USA still.
Right. And the key thing there, and you actually hit on it, is this whole thing of collaboration. And really, if it is an organization that is not doing business in the US, they need to be thinking about doing business in the US. And there are a number of US companies that, focus on doing business abroad, meaning, in the international space. But I think without that collaboration where we're learning from one another and potentially looking at joint ventures, I'm actually going to be talking here in the next week with an organization where they're doing something similar that I want to do. And I'm going to be really talking with them about maybe we can join forces. They already have the infrastructure in place, so I don't want to have to recreate all of that. And if I can bring that idea where we can jointly go forward and really take it forward together in what I would consider to be a joint venture, or maybe it's a joint partnership. So I haven't really had the detailed conversations, but that's one of those places where we really need to look at ourselves and say, hey, could we, if there's another organization already doing it, can we join forces? Can we take our research and our ideas and, actually keep that pace or fasten the pace, right? Increase the pace in which it can get out there to market. And I think we have to do that. And there are so many organizations that I could list that are really good at doing that. And don't just think about coming to government to do that. We need to be thinking about other big private industry companies that are in this space and forming partnerships with them as well.
So you mentioned in your presentation that simplifying and standardizing the process by which technology transfer is executed is of key importance. Now I'm wondering, who would be in charge of that, and where should this process take place? Is it in the companies themselves? Every company should make sure that their processes are standardized and simplified, or is it some other organization, perhaps universities, that can chip into that?
So yes, it would be all of the above, because all universities are going to have their process in and around research and development, and then companies are going to have that. And so they need to be thinking about how they streamline it. But one of the things that, could really happen in this space is our government labs, at least here in the US, our government labs play a huge piece in this. And in the last, I'd say 5 years, one of our services, so the Army in general, actually really took this on. And it was the Secretary of the Army, or actually the Chief of Staff of the Army, that really took this particular idea on of saying, I am, and his comment was he felt like it was slow. He felt like there was a lot of bureaucracy. And so he helped to create an innovation center that was focused in on future growth. And one of his ideas in and around this is that he wanted it to be a place where we could bring ideas and move them more rapidly to getting them out and commercialized in industry, right? And so that's one of the things that we could think about doing. How your government can come together with industry to be able to create something that's going to show here's the right way to do this, right? Here's how you can accelerate this level of growth.
Great. We have a question from Harald back there.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the success rate or failure rate of the entrepreneurship. In Europe, we are talking about a failure rate about 90%. What is the failure rate of entrepreneurship after 5 years in America or in your business unit?
Well, so that's a good point. And we do have a high failure rate with entrepreneurship. And most of it is you don't see them in business after a year or two, right? So they churn pretty quickly. And I can't remember, I want to say it's a pretty high percentage, maybe in and around the 80% range. But one of the things that really struck me in this last week, I went to a veterans conference, and it was a veterans small business conference. And at this conference, one of the things that they highlighted was veteran-owned businesses tend to not only be more robust, but they tend to have a lot more success. And so when we look at the number of veteran-owned businesses here in the US, they contribute a significant amount to our growth and economic development, and they actually are more stable. That's not to say that they don't have challenges, but I don't think that we should fear going into, if you want to be an entrepreneur, I don't think that you should let those numbers scare you. You will see a lot of entrepreneurs, or what I call serial entrepreneurs, right? They start an idea or a company and they move it as far as they can, and it may be successful, it may not, and then they move to the next. And so if we let that number scare us, then I think we would not have any growth whatsoever. We wouldn't be able to see, the advances in the medical technology or in, just the IT kind of space and technology. And so I think we have to be a little bit more bold and not afraid to fail, because I always like to say that if you're going to fail, then fail forward.
We have another question from the audience about the competencies that need to be taught at the universities. So what do you think are the competencies that are necessary to support the entrepreneurial spirit? What kind of recommendations would you give to the universities?
Well, I would go back to the slide that where we really talked about the key elements that was important for developing that culture. It doesn't matter whether you're an academic institution or whether you're a company. If you want to create a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation, then you want to have a process that's open. You want to have a process that's creative. You want to allow people time to be able to step into that and give their ideas. Make it so that they can post an idea. Maybe it's an idea box, or maybe it's an idea site, right, where they can just post their ideas. And if the idea is something that makes sense and they want to, that the organization wants to explore, then bringing that person in and saying, okay, let's explore this idea, right? So, almost create for the institution like a Shark Tank. Have it where they can come in and pitch their ideas, but make it a little less brutal, maybe, because I don't think we want it as brutal as Shark Tank. But we want them to come in and really pitch this and really, think about how can you create this this space for people to be creative. And one of the organizations that I worked for a number of years ago was Accenture. Accenture is a global consulting company, and I would have to say it was I had been there maybe 10 or 11 years. And we were really thinking about how can we get more ideas from our employees. And someone then created these, it had the light bulb, obviously, for the little sign, but they created these idea boxes that were placed all throughout our offices. And so now we're kind of, everyone, you're kind of in that virtual environment, but you could do the same thing where, they could submit their ideas to a virtual idea box. And, if they want to put their contact information so that, they can further collaborate, great. But if they don't, and they just want to throw it out there, that's something that you should think about. So openness, creativity, supporting the ability for people to fail, right? So don't penalize them when they have an idea and it doesn't work. Just tell them that, they got to keep working and try again, right? Come up with another idea and they need to move it forward.
We know that the entrepreneurial landscape in the US is considered as a global standard, right? It's the best environment to create your business. What are the key challenges of building such an effective entrepreneurial ecosystem that would be able to really offer comprehensive support for innovation and growing businesses? Just give us a few tips so we could replicate that in Estonia.
I think the big challenge here is that the resources are everywhere, right? There's so many organizations right now that want to support entrepreneurs. We don't know where all the resources are. Every single day, I'm learning about a new organization or a new site or a new process that I didn't even know existed. I could literally spend my whole year going to conferences and learning new things. And I still can't get it into one space. So I would say, from Estonia's perspective and thinking about how you all have leveraged technology, I think more than, I would have to say across your government, more than any other country that I know. I mean, maybe there are other ones, but I like to highlight that just because of what I know about the country. And you have an ability to create maybe, one place that entrepreneurs could go to be able to get information. That is most important because most of the time, for us, it's not about our abilities to be able to create the new. It's about knowing where to go for the resources, knowing where to go to be able to expand our knowledge, knowing where to go to ask for help. That would probably be the most important piece of it. And when I just think of entrepreneurship. So one of my first visits to Estonia, I went to the Innovation Center there in Tallinn. And I was so excited about the Innovation Center that I couldn't wait to come back and talk to our state government about creating and maybe even hosting some of the entrepreneurs from Estonia, but, here in the state of Maryland. And just that idea, I really continued to push and had a conversation with our lieutenant governor. And our lieutenant governor actually went with us and visited Estonia where he got a chance. So we set up, a number of meetings for him where he got a chance to talk to a number of different entrepreneurs focusing in on challenges that we were having here in the US and and really I say in the US, but here in the state of Maryland. And it went a step further. And so not only did he enjoy the visit and felt like it was one of the best visits, or at least that's what we got is the feedback, is he felt like it was one of the best visits and one of the best meetings. He then in turn hosted entrepreneurs from Estonia here in the state of Maryland to continue the discussions. We need to continue to do things like that.
Well, that's a great example. Thank you so much.